Hi guys, I'm Mohana. I'm an artist and illustrator based out of Kolkata, India, and I specialize mostly in floral and botanical illustrations with a special focus on ink illustration. You can find me at Art of Misanthropy on Instagram, Facebook, and all other social media. Now let's get started with today's tutorial. Because paper matters to me, I'm using this 140 GSM white sketchbook from Ayush paper. It has really nice, smooth white paper which is perfect for ink illustration, which is what we'll be focusing on today. It's also great for pencil sketches, light washes of watercolor, acrylic paints, and all other kinds of paint. Now for our other materials, you'll need a pencil, an eraser, some fine liners. I'm using the Sakura Micron fine liners, but you can use any fine liners that you might have, or even a gel pen or ballpoint pen. I'm also using a white pen, but this is entirely optional. I'm using the jelly roll. More details will be in the description box below. Let's start with our sketch. Since this is only our rough guide, I'm speeding through this step a little bit, but feel free to pause the video wherever necessary and follow along. I'm basically starting by positioning a few circles and ovals along more or less a straight line. These are going to be our flowers later on. I'm drawing them from slightly different angles just to give my artwork a little bit of interest and dimension. Now I'm drawing the stem and some buds along it and widening that stem at the bottom, and I'm adding a few leaves. Make sure the leaves are tapered at the top and wide towards the bottom. And I'm adding one final leaf just to again give it a little bit of depth and dimension. I'm finishing off this composition by adding two large and wide leaves right at the back. Now I'm just gently wiping off most of that graphite with my kneaded eraser. This is going to help make things easier for me in the next step. I'm going to start by sketching in my petals. I'm adding 4 petals per flower, but you can add 5 or 6 if you like. Generally, the Gladiolus has 6 petals, but since this is a more stylized approach, I'm doing 4. Following this general shape, I'm adding petals to each flower, just changing up the waves and curves just a little bit to make sure that not every flower looks exactly the same. And keep in mind again at this stage that every flower is facing a slightly different direction. This helps to add depth, dimension, and interest to our composition and our overall piece. Now I'm drawing a side-facing flower following the same principles again, just adding those soft curves and waves to give our flower that natural organic look that we're going for. Just repeating those same steps over and over again and adding in our last couple of flowers before we move on to our other elements. Next, I'm darkening the lines of my stem and adding my buds. I'm just creating some irregular, almost teardrop-like shapes and some capsule-like shapes with the bottoms a little wider than the tops. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add my leaves in again. I know we had already sketched this previously, but remember that was our rough guide, and now we just want to go ahead and darken those lines, and this is the point where we try to become a little more precise and really focus in on our shapes. Don't worry about being perfect, but do try and get the shapes as close to what you have in mind as possible. And I'm just finishing up that one last leaf. And for one final time now, I'm going to go ahead and lighten my lines again. The lighter your pencil lines are, the smoother and neater your line art is going to go down. So in order to make my line work as precise and stark and contrasted as possible, and so that the pencil lines don't mess with them, I erase most of my sketch, obviously leaving enough in place for me to be able to see what I'm adding line art to. But yeah, I'm just going ahead and adding lines to those shapes that I've already created. And for the slightly larger buds towards the bottom, I'm adding these segments, as you can see, and that is going to finish off my 3 larger buds. Now one final time, I'm going ahead and adding lines to my stem again, making sure that it's wider towards the bottom and tapered at the top, and doing the same for my leaves, tapered at the top, wider and sort of rounded off towards the bottom. This is the time to really focus on your lines and take your time. One key tip when it comes to line art is to not rush it and really take your time rendering those lines and details. And just finishing off once more that last leaf and moving on to our shading and details. This is the step that will really bring your illustration to life. So make sure to take your time with it and really understand what you're doing with the lines. Your shading lines should be darker towards the top or towards the beginning and lighter at the bottom or towards the end. And you want to keep in mind the shape and the form and the planes of every single element that you're shading. What that means is just paying attention to every single element that you're adding these shading lines to and the angles that they're facing. So for instance, when I'm shading petals that are facing the left, I'm going to try and make sure that my lines, my shading lines, are curved towards the left. And when my petals are facing the right, I'm going to try and do the same where the lines are facing the right or coming in from the right. Remember, this is the step that is going to make the most amount of difference and really bring your illustration to life. So take your time, focus on the lines, and start by applying a little bit of pressure towards the beginning of every line. And as you're reaching the end of that line, just lift off that pressure a little bit. This can be a little difficult initially if you're not used to this particular method of shading, but don't be discouraged because it's actually really easy. I would just suggest that if you're not familiar with this method of shading or with this particular medium, go ahead and practice these strokes on a scrap or a spare piece of paper before you actually move in to working on your final artwork. It's going to help you get the hang of this particular style and technique of shading, and it's going to go a long way in helping you use this in future artworks as well. So yeah, one final time, just take your time, practice this kind of shading, and I'm going ahead and using that same method to shade my stems and my leaves, again just keeping in mind the curves, forms and planes as well as the angles of the elements that I'm shading. So notice how I'm shading all of the leaves depending on where the curves and the flows of the shapes of the objects are. And I'm paying special attention to where the elements are all interacting or overlapping with one another. And I'm just darkening up those shadows. And lastly, I'm adding these stamens. They're just 3 curved lines with 3 flat ovals on the top. And yeah, it's that simple and our artwork is done. If you recreate this piece, don't forget to tag me at Art of Misanthropy and Ayush Paper as well. And yeah, see you guys next time. Don't forget to subscribe to Ayush Paper for more such tutorials.